Dr. Mark Changizi here, your Science Moment number 214, I believe. We're well into the 200s. We got 150 plus since COVID, since I belatedly restarted the series. And this month we have Dr. Tim Barber and my new book, A Decade in the Making, Expressly Human, Decoding the Language of Emotions. It's our grand unifying theory on the origins of emotional expressions, why we have them, how it's the real language that we all speak, all of us social animals speak. We think that we're speaking language with sort of grammar, all the, English or whatever language your language, but really going on underneath the surface is the main thing, which is the emotional expressions that we're actually using, the intonation in our facial expressions and the choice of words that we're using. That is the key to how we truly communicate, and it's what masks cover over. And so this is the first sort of product of our research institute that we started because of COVID and the threat to freedom and free speech. And so our Free Expression Research Institute, Free Expression Group, freex.group, is really devoted to studying freedom and free expression and how it works. And this is sort of our first large output from our institute. Now, I wanted to just read to you, I've read to you some excerpts from it before, and today I thought it was useful I'm going to read you sort of the conclusion. It's the introduction, and it's the first few sections within the introduction, which kind of provide a broad overview. Of course, some of it won't make sense because you haven't read the book yet, but I think it nevertheless kind of provides a high-level picture of some of the main arguments of why we evolved emotional expressions and why they're so important. The final one is called Truth and Intelligence. We won't really get into intelligence or truth so much in this. There's a lot more discussion in this chapter about free expression and how what intelligence is in light of the socio-emotional intelligence and broader kinds of structures in terms of understanding free expression in a free society. But let me just go through the introduction, sort of the summary aspects of the beginning of this chapter 7. All right, nutshell. And there's your book-length answer to the silent movie problem we introduced in chapter 1. The problem, recall, is the galaxy-sized chasm between the dialogue-free lives of our relatively recent ancestors and the brimming with dialogue lives of us in relatively recent times. In short, living as social animals without language seems almost inconceivable. But we saw that the lives of social animals aren't silent at all. Whether visual, auditory, or whatever, emotional expressions are constantly reverberating between social animals. And these expressions serve us better than any actual signaling system an expensive consulting firm might provide, no matter how clever they think they are. Our emotional expression system gives us the crucial ability to talk the talk that matters most in life, to find compromises, to negotiate, to avoid having to fight about absolutely everything. Because if you do have to fight about everything, you'll tend to make sure that everything is basically nothing, and you'll end up missing out on loads of potential scenarios where both you and the other party could both get something good out of it. The dead-eyed Nigels and Butches of the world, what sort of characters from earlier in the book, sharks, or dead-eyed sharks that couldn't emotionally communicate. The dead-eyed Nigels and Butches of the world miss out on countless juicy opportunities, given that the only notion of compromise they have available is fight, 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 which they'd very much like to avoid. That's why, after hundreds of millions of years of emotionally rich but masked creatures, some of us evolved to be unmasked. For the first time on Earth, some animals began expressing their emotions rather than keeping them inside. But they were not expressing their emotions in the sense of, hey, you know what? Here's the emotions I've got going on internally right now. No, instead, their emotional expressions are actually moves. We call them responses. Moves in a negotiation. I should get more, and I'm not kidding around. That sort of thing. But with any move we might make, we need to be prepared for the other party to give up on the negotiation and press the "and now we fight" button. And part of being prepared is having the right internal emotion. If I express aggressive, then I'm thinking to myself, what if you respond by throwing down the gauntlet that you're always carrying around with you for some reason? I'd better be prepared to fight just in case. If I plan on actually getting what I just claimed I should get with my expression of aggressive, namely more for me, then the internal emotion that's a pretty darn good one for actually getting more from me in a fight is aggression. The emotional expressions end up associated with internal emotions of the same name because that's the sensible emotion for us to have if we need to act, which of course we're trying to avoid. That's why we're emotionally signaling in the first place, is to avoid having to fight about absolutely everything. Second section, we've got the moves. As we worked out in chapters 2 through 4, there are 2 dimensions of responses or negotiation moves. That's because negotiations themselves have 2 dimensions. There's the offer dimension and the tension dimension. The offer dimension is what I want, and the tension is how serious I am about it. This led to the 2-dimensional array of emotional expressions we saw earlier in figure 20, or the lower half of figure 24. And it has 8 qualitatively distinct emotional expressions. 4 of these emotional expressions come from considering the space and volley of offer terms. The horizontal offer dimension is straddled by aggressive and conciliatory. And the vertical tension dimension is straddled by serious and casual. But we can instead view the space in diagonal terms so that a move in a negotiation is made by mentioning my options about about how confident I am and how confident you are. In this me so smart and you so stupid confidence way of considering the space, making claims about my own justifiable level of confidence amounts to a dimension straddled by emotional expressions, pride, and humility. And my claims about your confidence amount to dimensions straddled by respect and disdain. Those first 8 emotional expressions are just the 8 compass directions of response moves in a negotiation. They are at the center of our compromise-finding machinery. Now, again, you're not able to see this here, but I'll pop up on the screen. You can see the space of responses. These are the moves in a negotiation, the emotional expressions that correspond to those moves, which I'll cover in more detail in a future science moment, but it's useful to have it there. Next section, bet your life. But none of those moves would be at all useful if they weren't simultaneously poker moves. It's the poker side of emotional expressions that tends to keep the parties somewhat honest. As we saw in chapter 6, each of these emotional expressions concerns bets. Horizontal shifts are bets, shifts in my favor, or unbets if they're shifts in your favor. And vertical shifts dial up or down the degree to which these shifts are bets. And they're bets because we're social. Folks in the community keep track of whether I've been right or wrong and how disagreeable I've been. The poker game of life, undergirding honesty, depends on simple, run-of-the-mill, much complained about gossip. So now you've got a perfect response when your friends tell you to stop being such a gossip. The fact that betting is happening at all gives us the emotional expressions their confidence-related meaning in the first place. As we've seen, emotional expressions are built out of the sole ingredient of confidence. And they get their confidence meaning because they're a bet. That's all a bet can convey. Were social animals able to mind meld and be certain of the other party's negotiation response move, that 2-dimensional space and its 8 compass-directed emotional expressions would be the whole enchilada. There'd be no need for any other emotional expressions. Here's your receipt. But alas, mind melds were not an option back then, or now for that matter, so social animals needed to be able to confirm that they'd gotten the intended message via what we call an acknowledgement expression in chapter 5. My total emotional expression is the combination of an acknowledgement of the response move you just made and a response of my own move. It's through these "you said that, but I say this" salvos that the parties become temporarily tangled with one another in a negotiation tango. This led to a second 2-dimensional space, as shown in the outer ring of figure 22. For each response move in the inner part, there's some acknowledgement that says, you just made that response move. We could think of the acknowledgement space as a second ply over the top of the response space. It might not have initially seemed that a simple expression of acknowledgement could lead to an interesting and meaningful emotional expression, but boy, oh boy, The resultant emotional expressions were readily identifiable and among the greatest hits in our emotionally expressive repertoire. The horizontal dimension for acknowledgements has our favorite hit of all time, happy, although its opposite end has our least favorite, unhappy. My expression of these serves to acknowledge receipt of your expression of, respectively, conciliatory and aggressive. And the vertical dimension for acknowledgements, which concerns confirming receipt that you got serious or casual, is the home of the emotional expressions, respectively, surprised and relaxed. And with that, we had two-dimensional spaces. In terms of the compass directions, that meant we had 8 emotional expressions in each space for a total of 16 emotional expressions. The whole enchilada. This is the last section I'll cover of the last chapter. Was that the whole enchilada? Not at all. As we saw in chapter 5, any of the emotional expressions in one space can be combined with any of those in the other space. Then, bang, clonk, zam, we're overflowing in emotional expressions, 81 in all. It's in these combinations where we find the myriad of celebrity emotional expressions we all know and love, like angry, close to unhappy and proud, thankful, close to happy and serious, and many more. Figures 29 and 30 served as Rosetta Stones, providing a summary of the full space of emotional expressions emanating from our theory and their meaning in negotiation terms. This is what is universal across all social animals. Plus, it all emanates simply from first principles. It's something we can derive from fundamental premises. All right, so that gives you a hint into what we're up to in terms of sort of seeing the broad summary of what we're up to in this book on the origins of emotional expressions and what they mean. I encourage you to give us some support. We've been on the cutting edge fighting back COVID authoritarianism. Journalists who encourage COVID authoritarianism now view me as an evil, unclean, bad guy. So I need your help. We need your help to support research that brings freedom, more freedom to us all. Thank you. And that was your Zion's moment.